YouTube, what's good? Senju, I'm back at it again with another video. So for today we have a updated crossbow and daggers build guide. This build, currently within its new iteration that I have actually improved upon, is now getting anywhere from 160k within 15 seconds. Now previously, the build was 148k within 25 seconds. So we've cut the time down by half. Keep in mind, this is just the burst portion of the rotation. This is not the sustained DPS. The total DPS of the entire rotation, we're looking at anywhere from 250 to at least 300k within the entire rotation. Now, that is highly variable dependent on your offhand attacks, because to understand how crossbow and dagger works, you need to understand that the full potential of the damage that you could receive within a crossbow and daggers rotation is fully dependent on the RNG of hitting offhand attacks. If you're not hitting offhand attacks, then you are always going to be on the lower threshold. That's just the way that the crossbow and dagger system works. If you're consistently hitting offhand attacks, you're going to be so far ahead, it's actually going to be ridiculous. But I've been able to basically get a consistent 160k all the way to 200 and at least 210, I want to say, on the damage. This is within a full rotation. And we've actually ended up cutting the time as well, so that you don't spend so much time doing monotonous stuff in between. So we've cut the rotation down from about 25 seconds all the way to 16 seconds. And the damage is insane. We're talking on one stack of a detonation mark, you're looking at anywhere from, depending on, again, offhand attacks, but you are looking at anywhere from 30k to 50k on a single stack of detonation mark. With two stacks of detonation marks, again with offhand attacks, you're looking at anywhere from 60k to nearly 100k, and in some cases 800k. That is nearly perfect on offhand attacks. The damage is stupid, and we're here to prove it. So let's get right into it and go over the gear. Alrighty, we've stepped into the gearing section. Now, to keep it plain and simple, there are a lot of new players that are still coming into the game, seeing as the game just launched globally about a month ago. And for those of you that already know what the gear is and you already have an idea of where you're going, you can use the timestamps below to go ahead and skip to the skills section, where we go over the skill changes as well as the new passives, so forth and so on, and then you can go to the live damage testing. For everybody else who's new, or maybe you need a bit of a refresher, this is the gearing section, and this is the build on max roll, which will be linked in the description. Also, I've been trying to figure out why I can't do a written guide on this website. I'm assuming I need to be some top, tier content creator to get that privilege. So I'm gonna email Maxroll and see if they're going to allow me to do a written guide, so I can put a written guide out for this build, so people have a better understanding without having to continuously come back to the video. Just to make it easier for some people who like to read to get that content in. Now, for those of you that are new or need a refresher, this is the build guide. This is the early game build, and then we have the mid game to 50 build. Now, this is pretty much going to carry you until you get to the early end game, which is where I'm currently at. However, for this, I just wanted to make sure that you guys have an idea of what your stats are going to look like. Obviously, you have your main hand and offhand damage. You have your offhand double attack chance, which is based on the currently equipped weapon. You have your strength, dexterity, your wisdom, your perception. Pretty decent on your evasion, and this is with fully traded gear. Keep in mind that getting full traits is a bit difficult for purple gear. Pretty easy for blue gear, especially since most of this stuff is cheap. But if you prefer to keep the early or the mid game gear until you get fully traded pieces of purples, you're more than welcome to do that. Your damage will not suffer by a massive amount, considering that the damage is fully based on your rotation. But once you start to swap out some other pieces and you start to rotate in some new pieces, it will get a lot easier for you to hit higher numbers. So again, you have pretty decent offensive stats. I mean, look at your crit chance. Keep in mind that for every 1,000 points that you have into your crit chance, you're getting about 50% crit chance against an enemy that has no kind of endurance. Keep in mind that you can weaken an enemy's endurance, and that doesn't have to directly be used. So having literally 1230 on all your crit is insane. That's nutty. And you're still having a pretty decent melee hit chance, range hit chance, and your magic hit chance. So everything is looking pretty good. Build is pretty much as stationary as it was before. But let's go ahead and look at the early end game setup. Again, you're rocking the Rex Chimera's crossbows. You have the Laquarius's Wicked Thorns. You have your Phantom Wolf Mask with your Plate of the Field General. You have the Grips of the Executioner, the Supreme Devotion Cloak, Sabatons of the Field General, these are going to get changed to the Phantom Wolf pants once you get to the maxed end game section, or you start to just rotate in pieces. This was literally a copy and paste of the current build that I was running prior to getting my upgrades. So these are going to be the stats where if you get to end game and you're starting to really focusing out your end game, these are going to be the stats that you have. Keep in mind that you can change out some things depending on what you feel. I've seen some people take the build and replace Field General with Shadow Harvester because they decided they wanted more crit damage. Just keep in mind that this is a guide. This is not a mandatory thing of what you need to run. Now, what I'm personally doing, funny enough, is I'm actually going to get rid of 50 dex and I'm going to go with 50 perception instead of 50 dex. And that is mainly because I want the attack range increase personally. But again, like I said, this is a guide. It's not a mandatory thing that you have to follow. It's just here to get you from point A to point B. But if at the end of the day you want to mimic exactly the kind of damage that I'm putting out, then at the bare minimum, these are the pieces of gear that you're going to want with the traits, and these are the stat points that you're going to want. And then maxed end game, which is pretty much going to be nearly unachievable for a very long time, because you're going to need Queen Belendir's bows and you're going to need the Clasp of the Conqueror. Now, Clasp of the Conqueror, funny enough, is not difficult to get. That's actually very easy to get. The problem is getting the bows. I mean, you're going to be stuck with the Rex Chimera's bows, and funny enough, you can actually keep the Rex Chimera's bows depending on whether or not you really like the offhand attack health bump, or if you just want the extra damage. Me personally, I don't really care for the health bump. I trust my healers, so I'm gonna be going for this, and I'm just gonna keep going until I can get it. And then once I get it, really gonna be cooking. And then later on, I will drop a tier 2 guide once we go ahead and we get the tier 2 armor, which I don't think is going to be too far out, but I don't think it's going to be too immediate as well. So this should last for a very long time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the skill section. And then once we get into the skill section, we will go to the live testing. And then after that, you're pretty much good to go. I can set you on your way and you can start to go pretty much nearly one phase every boss in the game. And if I see a bunch of you out there with crossbows and daggers and we start mowing down bosses, hey, just say hi. That's all you gotta do. I had so many people over the past week that's like, yo, I followed you on YouTube, yada yada yada, and they were blowing up chat and in dungeon. I was like, man, that is a cool experience. I haven't had that since Warzone, so it's kind of fun. But let's get into the skill section. Alrighty, so we are at the skills section. Now, going briefly over the skills, well, it shouldn't be brief, you know me by now. We like to go in depth over here. But briefly overlooking some of the changes, we have Annihilation Barrage, as stated before, and then we have Vampiric Strike. Now, you're probably wondering, why on earth is Vampiric Strike here? And I'll get to that in a second. Let's go ahead and go over the passives just so we have a clear understanding of what actually changed. We have Wrathful Edge, Ambidexterity, Bloodlust with Nature's Power, Assassin's Instincts, and then these are the 2 flex slots. Now, previously, we had Murderous Energy, and I forget what we had here. It might have been Shadow Walker, but we rotated out Murderous Energy for Corrupt Nail, and that's just to get the increased weaken hit chance on abilities that do not have a 100% chance to apply their weaken effects. Just getting you a little bit more ability chance to go ahead and get your control or tactic effects off. Now, in addition to that, you have your Shadow Walker and your Piercing Strike. For the weapon mastery passives, people tend to forget these, but pretty much the exact same as before. Your entire bottom assassination tree, keep in mind that these smaller nodes do not apply until you have the weapon equipped, meaning that if you are in open world or you're doing a fight or you're in PvP, and you happen to have the crossbows out, these small nodes do not apply, meaning you need to actually have the daggers out for these small nodes to apply. However, the giant glowing golden rounded nodes always apply no matter which bar you're on. Now, for the crossbow, same thing. You're going to pretty much fill out the entire bottom row. I chose to come up here to get the ranged heavy attack chance because I just wanted the heavy attack chance, but if you really want to, you can fill out the rest of the bottom row and then you'll come up here and stop once you get to cold vision. Now, for the skills, we've replaced Block Blade with the Rupturing Parry, and I'll explain why briefly. I'm actually doing so much damage in dungeons that I'm pulling the bosses off of the tanks, which I didn't know was possible until recently. So, in order to pretty much save myself in case I happen to pull the boss off and he happens to do a Fury attack, and then later on once we get to T2 and they start doing Wrath attacks, I'm gonna need the ability to go ahead and get just a little bit of health back until the healer can get to me, the tank can re-grab the boss, or I can pop a potion. So this is just pure survivability, although if you want more damage and you want survivability that isn't revolved around giving you HP back, you can very easily go back with Block Blade, and that'll give you some mana back. It'll give you the ability to proc poison, which you do not have in a Thunderclouds build unless you're using Queen Belendir's bows, and you'll still be able to live because you're invisible. Now, what exactly has changed with these skills and what is the new rotation? So, to briefly go over why we're getting so much damage now, it's because of an interesting interaction that I found with Selfless Diffusion, Annihilation Barrage, and Detonation Mark. So, to briefly go over Selfless Diffusion, which is pretty much the star of the show, on the second line it very clearly says that whenever you land an attack on an enemy that has a weaken effect applied to them, it increases the duration of the weaken effect by 0.5 seconds. Well, guess what? When they say landing an attack, they literally mean skills that are labeled as attacks. Not just any skill in the game that attacks an enemy, it has to be labeled as an attack. Now, once I figured that out, I basically decided to test out a bunch of abilities that were labeled as attacks because I wanted to see how high I could get Detonation Mark to go. Funny enough, the very last thing I tested was Annihilation Barrage, and that's because I don't like the fact that this thing has a 1-minute cooldown. But after seeing what is possible when you actually understand synergies, I now understand why this thing has a 1-minute cooldown. Essentially, the rotation is still the same. You're going to do all of your pre-buffs, your Lightning Infusion, into your Mana Exchange, and then into your Selfless Diffusion. However, once you proc your Selfless Diffusion, here's how the rotation is going to go now. Detonation Mark. Now, depending on whether or not your offhand version of this procs, you will receive either 1 or 2 stacks. Once you proc your Detonation Mark, it's going to go Rapid Fire, or Quick Fire, excuse me, Nimble Leap, and then you're going to go ahead and hit Lightning Infusion, Cleaving Moonlight, Thunderous Bombing. Now, depending on whether or not you receive a Thunderous Bombing offhand attack, you may or may not receive a ginormous cooldown on this. But let's say, for instance, you do get the offhand attack. Here's how the rotation is going to go if you do get the offhand attack on your Thunderous Bombing. Thunderous Bombing, then you're going to Knife Throw directly back into Thunderous Bombing and then immediately into Annihilation Barrage Shot. Because you're using this on single targets, it's not going to eat your mana, but the beauty of it is that because each attack from the crossbow counts as its own instance of damage and the skill is labeled as an attack, you can run the Detonation Mark timer all the way back up to 4 to 5 seconds, which, if you count the initial 3 seconds you get, can in fact give you anywhere from a fully 8-second or 10-second Detonation Mark. Now, once you go ahead and you get your Annihilation Barrage shot off and you can very clearly see that your Detonation Mark is actually run up on its timer, the rotation is very simple after that. You're going to go ahead and hit Cleaving Moonlight twice into a Thunderous Bombing, and depending on whether or not you get another offhand attack, your cooldown may be lessened, which will allow you to go ahead and get another Knife Throw off and then go back into your Thunderous Bombing. That is your entire first rotation, and that will be done within 8 seconds. It is actually insane how much damage you can get out of Detonation Mark when you're using this interaction. Now, keep in mind that you just used your Annihilation Barrage for that first half of the rotation, so you're gonna have to wait on that cooldown. Here's the beauty of this game. We have longbow users, right? And longbow users can significantly reduce your cooldown as you're attacking the boss. So guess what? I've actually had fights so far just from using this new rotation where I've been able to use the first half of this rotation back to back to back, and I'm doing so much damage that we're 2 to 1 phasing every boss in the game, and that's with random parties. These are not stacked, queued up parties. All you need is a longbow user that is giving you the cooldown refreshing ability, and you will be able to fly through these bosses because you're going to be able to continuously spam your first half of the rotation. But let's say, for instance, you don't have it and you need to go into your sustained DPS rotation. It's very simple. Once you finish that entire first rotation, all you're going to do is reset again. You're going to go ahead and hit your Lightning Infusion, back into your Mana Exchange, back into your Selfless Diffusion, and then the rotation changes slightly to benefit the fact that you're not able to use the Annihilation Barrage, and the rotation is very simple. Detonation Mark, then you're going to go Quick Fire, Nimble Leap, Cleaving Moonlight, Thunderous Bombing, then you're going to go into Knife Throw, and then depending on whether or not, again, you had the offhand attack hit, you could hit another Thunderous Bombing. But if you did not get that to hit, then it's very simple. You're just going to go ahead and Knife Throw, reset your cooldown, hit another Thunderclouds Bombing, And then by that time, the selfless diffusion will come off of cooldown again, and you reset and do the entire rotation all over again. This so far has netted me from 168k through a single rotation to nearly 300k. And if all of your offhand attacks proc, then you're looking at anywhere from 200 to 400k in a single rotation. It actually makes zero sense how much damage you're able to put out, but considering that this is the hardest class to use, I can see why it's so important to go ahead and use this. Now, Vampiric Strike exists purely as supplementary damage or additional health if you need it, because without us needing Mad Sword Dance, I found no reason to actually have it on. And considering the fact that I don't like Weak Point because it requires me to have to wait until there's a Fury attack being cast, Wind Snatcher is no longer needed because I have way more attack speed due to my skill setup and my class setup. I have a flex slot, so I decided to just go ahead and throw Vampiric Strike in there because it deals decent damage, and it can heavy attack, and it can offhand attack, and it heals you. So it's just really good utility and decent, just decent supplementary damage. But that's essentially all you have to worry about. So now that we've gone through the skills, we will go into the live testing and show you exactly how this rotation will be performed and exactly how much damage you will receive when doing this rotation at its maximum. Which, keep in mind, isn't even the maximum, because if you have a longbow user, then you're really going to be able to go ahead and spam this entire rotation. Alright, we are at the live testing. So, over here we're going to show you exactly how to do the DPS. Now, this rotation could vary, and that vary is specifically made on Thunderous Bombing, because it is possible that if you get additional offhand procs with Thunderous Bombing, your cooldown will be shorter, and in combination with using that in Knife Throw, it is possible to get multiple Thunderous Bombings off in one detonation mark with this setup. So, again, we have no buffs. There are no kind of food buffs, no kind of Gigantrite buff. In fact, I think the only thing that we have currently is the mana buff for being in a test dummy location and the Stellarite buff. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the testing. So, as you saw right there, exactly as I was saying, you're still able to have insanely high sustained DPS, and I don't know if you noticed, I just hit a 100k crit on my detonation mark, and I still had time to go ahead and start up a sustained DPS rotation. And the Gigantrite's blessing just came in. So, this right here, in my opinion, is the hardest hitting setup that we can have right now for Crossbow and Dagger. I knew it before that, I just needed to make sure over the previous couple of days that while in testing that this was actually going to be able to do it consistently. It wasn't about packing as much damage into detonation mark as possible, it was about doing it consistently. Now, the sustained DPS rotation is exactly the same as before, so if you guys want to have that kind of guide, you can go back to the previous video and go ahead and watch that. But the updated version of the rotation with the new abilities, all you need to do is substitute Mad Sword Dance for Frenzied for the Vampire Strike, and then get rid of Fatal Stigma and just replace that with the Annihilation Barrage. And as you just saw, the new rotation is definitely hitting harder. It's packing way more of a punch, and with the offhand variations, it is extremely possible to hit 100k on your detonation mark and even higher. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video. Make sure you guys leave a sub, make sure you guys leave a like or sub if you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.